Comrades of Africa, brothers and sisters who have carried the weight of centuries, we stand today at a crossroads. South Africa, once the blazing torch of liberation, now finds itself trapped in the shadow of its own history. The movement that shattered apartheid has become a custodian of privilege, and the voices of the poor echo against walls of indifference. Across our continent, the story repeats. Leaders who promised freedom now bound by the golden chains of foreign approval. They tell us to wait, to be patient, to believe in gradual reform, while our children walk barefoot to schools with no books and our workers dig in mines whose wealth they will never touch. But there is another path, a path of courage, sacrifice, and truth. It is the path chosen by those who refuse to let Africa's spirit be auctioned to the highest bidder. Stay with us. This is not a memory of the past, but a call to the present. Subscribe, remain with us, and let us reclaim the dignity our elders dreamed of for an Africa that bows to no master. The story of South Africa is one of the greatest paradoxes in modern African history. Once the battlefield of global solidarity, a land where millions across the world rallied against apartheid, it has today become a mirror reflecting both the triumph and the tragedy of liberation movements. In 1994, when Nelson Mandela walked free and the African National Congress entered government, the world hailed a new dawn. There were songs of freedom in Soweto, hope in the Eastern Cape, and promises that the shackles of economic and political oppression would be broken forever. Yet 3 decades later, the songs have become muted, the promises postponed, and the liberation flame dimmed. At the heart of this transformation is the journey of the ANC itself. Once a symbol of defiance, it has, under the stewardship of President Cyril Ramaphosa, become an institution of compromise. Ramaphosa, once celebrated as a trade unionist and negotiator during the turbulent final years of apartheid, now stands accused of managing decline rather than inspiring renewal. He promised unity, jobs, and reform, yet South Africa's unemployment remains among the highest in the world. For young people, the statistics are devastating. Over 1/3 remain without work, despite holding degrees and dreams. The shacks surrounding Johannesburg and Cape Town expand, their tin roofs reflecting not progress but the persistence of inequality. It is not merely the failure to deliver jobs that haunts Ramaphosa's government, but the sense that the ANC itself has abandoned its revolutionary spirit. Chris Hani, assassinated in 1993, believed that political freedom without economic liberation would be hollow. He warned against a compromise that secured the ballot but left wealth untouched. Today, his prophecy feels fulfilled. Mines remain in the hands of powerful corporations, often foreign. Land reform, once the cornerstone of transformation, drags on in endless debates while millions of Black South Africans remain dispossessed. Schools in rural areas crumble, hospitals are underfunded, and inequality is among the starkest in the world. Yet South Africa is not alone in this struggle. Across the continent, leaders who once stood as warriors for freedom have morphed into administrators of dependency. They attend summits in Paris and Brussels, pose for cameras at the World Economic Forum, and return home with polished speeches but empty promises. They call this stability. But for the poor mother in a township, carrying water across kilometers, for the youth with a degree but no opportunity, for the worker crushed by inflation, this is not stability. It is betrayal disguised as governance. Against this backdrop, Burkina Faso has chosen a different path. Its young leader, Ibrahim Traoré, has openly declared that revolution is not history but duty. Facing threats of terrorism, sanctions, and diplomatic isolation, he and his people declared they would no longer wait for permission to live with dignity. In Ouagadougou, they speak not of moderation but of courage. Their stance may not be easy, but it offers something absent in South Africa's current reality: the refusal to bow to the same systems that have long drained Africa of its strength. The choice to risk hardship for sovereignty has rekindled conversations across the continent. If one small, landlocked nation can stand tall, why can't those with vast wealth and stronger institutions do the same? This contrast between South Africa's retreat and Burkina Faso's defiance has become symbolic. It forces Africa to confront a painful truth. Liberation movements do not guarantee liberation values. The ANC, like many movements that once carried the hopes of their people, has become consumed by survival. Political survival, economic survival, and the survival of its elites. The people, meanwhile, are left with slogans recycled at rallies while their daily lives remain unchanged. Revolution, it seems, has been converted into rhetoric. The spirit that once made apartheid tremble has been replaced by policies designed to reassure investors. But Africa must ask, who are these investors? And why must the future of millions hinge on their confidence? Is the dignity of an entire continent to be measured by stock markets in London and New York? South Africa's history proves that when the people rise, even the strongest system can fall. Yet its present reality shows how quickly that spirit can be lost when leadership chooses comfort over courage. This is the tragedy of modern liberation movements. The victory of the ballot became the burial of the struggle. For the elders who watched Mandela's release with tears of joy, and for the youth who once sang Amandla in the streets, this is not the freedom they imagined. South Africa has the institutions, the economy, and the history to lead Africa into a new age. But instead, it has become an example of what happens when leadership grows cautious, when boldness is sacrificed on the altar of global approval. And so the question emerges, urgent and unsettling. If one of Africa's brightest flames has dimmed, can the fire of anti-colonial Africa be rekindled elsewhere? The story of South Africa under Cyril Ramaphosa reaches its most painful moment when we confront the reality of lost courage. The man who once sat across the table from apartheid's negotiators, hailed as a strategist of freedom, is now accused of being a steward of compromise. To many, he has become the most symbolic figure of the continent's retreat from radical transformation. His speeches echo with promises of renewal, but his governance is marked by delay, caution, and accommodation of the very structures that liberation was meant to dismantle. This is where the emotional crescendo strikes, the betrayal of the people who placed their hopes in him. The youth who believed their suffering would be answered find themselves discarded once the votes are counted. They were told that education was the key to prosperity, only to graduate into unemployment lines. Workers who once filled the mines and factories with the power of their labor are today met with indifference or even repression when they demand fair wages. Mothers in rural villages still walk miles for water, their children squeezed into classrooms where teachers are underpaid and resources non-existent. These are not isolated failures. They are symptoms of a leadership too timid to disturb the entrenched powers of wealth and privilege. The betrayal stings even more because South Africa was once the hope of an entire continent. From Soweto to Lagos, from Dakar to Nairobi, the struggle against apartheid inspired millions. Names like Chris Hani and Steve Biko were not merely South African heroes, they were continental beacons. Hani spoke of the working class as the true leaders of liberation, a vision that terrified the powerful and cost him his life. Steve Biko insisted that black consciousness was the key to dismantling psychological chains. Both gave their lives believing in a future where freedom meant more than casting a ballot. It meant ownership of land, control of resources, and dignity for the poor. Yet under Ramaphosa, that vision feels like a tombstone rather than a roadmap. The public reaction reflects this sense of betrayal. Protests erupt in townships. Students chant in campuses and workers march in the streets. Fees Must Fall became more than a campaign. It became a cry against a system that continues to exclude the majority. The voices of the youth thunder against the walls of privilege, demanding answers to questions that leaders prefer to avoid. Where is the land? Where are the jobs? Where is the justice we were promised? Yet each time the response from the government is hesitation, commissions, consultations, and endless speeches about stability. Stability for whom? Certainly not for the millions struggling to survive. Beyond South Africa, the wider African audience watches with both sadness and recognition. They see in Ramaphosa a reflection of their own leaders, men who once spoke of revolution but now speak of investor confidence. They recognize the pattern. A liberation movement grows old, becomes an electoral machine, and clings to power while its people remain shackled by poverty. The global media, meanwhile, applauds maturity, calling it prudent governance. But to the hungry worker, prudence looks like cowardice. To the disillusioned youth, maturity feels like betrayal. The language of international diplomacy hides the cries of the streets. This dissonance creates a moment of high drama, the gap between the dream and the reality. South Africa's once mighty ANC, now tarnished by scandals and compromise, is a warning to the rest of the continent. A movement can defeat apartheid but still fail to deliver true liberation. A party can inherit power yet lose its soul. And a leader can rise with the aura of promise only to govern with the caution of fear. That is why Ramaphosa has become not just a president but a symbol, a reminder that liberation without courage is no liberation at all. The global reaction adds fuel to this fire. Western capitals praise Ramaphosa as a partner who ensures stability. Investors see him as a safe pair of hands, a man who will not disrupt markets. They reward his caution even as his people suffer. In this arrangement, Africa's tragedy is celebrated as success abroad. But in the dusty streets of townships, in the despair of unemployed graduates, the truth is evident. Stability has come at the price of justice. And justice, once delayed, becomes denied. This is the climax of the story, when the gulf between the revolutionary past and the managed present becomes undeniable. The fire that once burned in the ANC is flickering. The cries of the youth grow louder. The patience of the poor wears thin. The betrayal is no longer hidden in policy papers. It is written in the lives of millions. And history teaches us this. When the oppressed are pushed too far, they will rise. Not out of hatred, but out of necessity. Not because they wish to destroy, but because they can no longer survive in silence. The storm is building. The question is no longer whether South Africa's people will act, it is when. The failures of South Africa's leadership under the ANC and Cyril Ramaphosa are not abstract. They are lived realities, felt daily in the homes, streets, and workplaces of ordinary citizens. When a government chooses compromise over courage, the consequences ripple across every layer of society. What begins as hesitation in the halls of power soon becomes despair in the households of the poor. In the immediate term, the civil consequences are plain. South Africa now holds one of the world's highest rates of inequality, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a small elite while millions remain trapped in poverty. Informal settlements continue to sprawl across city edges, their residents surviving without reliable water, sanitation, or electricity. Crime and insecurity rise as desperation drives the youth into perilous paths. Families fracture under the weight of unemployment, with entire generations left idle, disillusioned, and angry. Schools are overcrowded, and young children learn quickly that their birthright is disadvantage. Hospitals struggle under shortages, leaving the poor to queue for hours in underfunded clinics. This is not the promise of liberation, it is the perpetuation of exclusion. Over the medium term, the political consequences grow even more dangerous. When citizens lose faith in their government, trust in democracy itself begins to erode. Voter turnout falls. Cynicism spreads. The youth, told repeatedly that they are the future, see no evidence of that claim in practice. In their eyes, ballots appear powerless to change realities, and the entire political system risks collapse into apathy or unrest. Already, South Africa has witnessed waves of protest that reveal a simmering discontent. If this continues unchecked, the nation risks instability not unlike the crises seen elsewhere on the continent. What makes this erosion particularly tragic is the contrast with what could be. South Africa is a nation rich with institutions, resources, and a history of triumph against impossible odds. It has the capacity to lead Africa into an era of dignity and prosperity. Yet by choosing moderation and global approval, it has chosen stagnation. Burkina Faso, by contrast, has chosen a harder path. Faced with terrorism and economic isolation, its people declared that survival with dignity is preferable to survival without it. In Ouagadougou, leaders speak of sovereignty as necessity, not luxury. They understand that poverty, terrorism, and dependency are the wages of compromise. By risking short-term suffering, they aim to build long-term independence. The civil consequences in Burkina Faso are harsh, yet they carry a different character. Hardship is endured with a sense of purpose. Citizens see their struggle as part of a greater fight for self-determination. In South Africa, hardship is endured with bitterness because it comes not from bold decisions but from timid leadership. This contrast reveals a deeper truth. Suffering cannot be avoided, but it can either be the price of courage or the punishment of cowardice. One unites a people in hope, the other fragments them in despair. Politically, the consequences stretch beyond national borders. South Africa's retreat from boldness weakens the continent's collective bargaining power. If the nation that once stood as the beacon of anti-apartheid resistance now bows to market forces, what message does that send to the rest of Africa? That courage is temporary? That sovereignty is negotiable? Each hesitation in Pretoria reverberates in Lagos, Nairobi, and Dakar. It emboldens foreign powers who know that Africa's elites will prioritize international praise over local justice. It discourages grassroots movements who feel abandoned by leaders they once revered. And so we arrive at the uncomfortable question, who truly benefits from this state of affairs? Is it the millions of South Africans who still queue for basic services? Is it the unemployed graduates watching their dreams wither? Or is it the corporations extracting wealth? The investors who see Ramaphosa's timidity as reassurance, the elites who live behind gates while the people live behind broken promises. The answer is clear and it cuts deep. This is why civil frustration is turning into political danger. The poor cannot wait forever. The youth cannot remain silent forever. A storm is forming in the minds of the people. If ignored, it may explode in ways that neither Pretoria nor the global community can contain. And perhaps that is the true cost of compromise, not stability, but instability delayed. Do you believe this is the kind of awakening Africa needed all along?
Many people are familiar with the air power, reconnaissance, air defense, including air-to-air combat, such are the strongest of the air forces. Stay to the end of this video as we discover the strongest.
When we shift our gaze beyond South Africa's borders, the picture becomes even clearer.
That led to the death
failures
of
of liberation movements
the
are not
Libyan Air Force
sustained by
has a
local
total number
leaders alone.
of Air Force.
They are
Located in South Africa,
legitimized, and
Angola
often
is the seventh
celebrated
largest
by
country in
global
Africa.
powers. Washington, Paris, Brussels, and London have mastered the art of applauding African governments that
Over the
choose
years,
caution
the
over
country has been
courage.
working hard
They
to
call it
strengthen its air
responsible
force.
leadership. They praise stability, but in truth, what they value is
Has a total
predictability.
number of 13,500 personnel and 12 air bases.
Debts and avoids disturbing the economic order inherited from colonialism.
Number
Cyril
7.
Ramaphosa
The troops are
has
also
become a
deployed in
favorite these
peacekeeping
circles.
missions in
Western
different parts of the
leaders
world.
see in him
Such
a partner who
Number
will not
5.
challenge
The
mining
Nigerian Air Force.
corporations, financial
Located in West
institutions,
Africa,
or
Nigerian
trade
Civil War,
agreements that keep
the
South
Nigerian
Africa
Civil War,
dependent.
and the
At
Sierra
the
Leone
World
Civil
Economic
War,
Forum in Davos,
and
he
800
is
reserve
welcomed as a
personnel.
modern
The South African
statesman,
Air Force
someone who
ranks fourth in the
reassures
continent in the
investors
World
that
War I,
Africa's
World War
largest
II, the
industrialized
Angolan Bush War,
economy will
the
not
Korean
drift
War,
toward
and the
radical
6 aircraft,
transformation.
and 5,000
Yet what does
personnel.
this mean for
The
the
largest air
ordinary
bases in
South
Ethiopia
African?
include
It
the
means
has
that
been
his
involved in the
president may
Ethiopian
be
Civil War,
celebrated
the
abroad
Ethiopian-Somali
while
War,
being
and
condemned
the
at home.
Ethiopian-Eritrean
It means
Air
the
Force.
applause of Wall
Located
Street
in North
echoes
Africa,
louder than the
Algeria
cries of
actively
Soweto.
invests in
In
its $1 million
contrast,
deal
leaders
with
who dare
Russia
to
for
resist this
aircraft
arrangement
supply.
are demonized. When Burkina Faso
Topping the
under
list of the
Ibrahim
strongest air
Traoré
forces on the
declared that it would
continent
no
is
longer
the Egyptian
accept
Air Force,
exploitation
trains,
disguised
warships
as
and artillery
partnership,
than Israel.
Western headlines branded him a radical,
Share
a
and subscribe
populist,
as I bring you
even
more
a threat to
information on the
stability.
African continent,
Sanctions,
people,
diplomatic isolation, and warnings soon follow. The message is consistent. If you play by the rules of foreign capitals, you are hailed as responsible. If you refuse, you are treated as reckless. This is the double standard that Africa has faced since independence. The rhetoric of partnership masks the reality of control. The reaction of international institutions further reveals this bias. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank continue to offer loans tied to conditions that limit African sovereignty. Trade agreements with the European Union preserve markets for European goods while flooding African economies with imports. Aid is distributed with fanfare, but it rarely addresses structural dependency. Instead, it pacifies governments into maintaining the status quo. In this framework, African development is not measured by the well-being of the people, but by GDP figures, investor confidence, and credit ratings determined in distant capitals. Even within Africa's own institutions, silence often prevails. The African Union and regional blocs like ECOWAS frequently speak of unity, but too often they avoid confronting governments that betray their citizens. Fear of upsetting foreign sponsors or destabilizing elite networks has turned continental bodies into guardians of quiet diplomacy rather than engines of transformation. They host summits, release communiques, and call for calm, while the people demand change. This global context matters because it explains why betrayal persists. It shows why leaders like Ramaphosa are rewarded for timidity while bold figures are punished. And it underscores the dilemma facing Africa. Can we continue to look outward for approval when our people suffer inwardly? Can the dream of anti-colonial Africa survive if foreign powers still define what is acceptable leadership? Here lies the cliffhanger. If Africa cannot trust the world to save it, can it learn to save itself? Africa now stands at a fork in the road. One path is familiar, worn down by decades of hesitation and compromise. It is the path of moderation, where leaders speak of gradual reform, where the language of progress fills reports but never touches the lives of the people. On this road, the poor remain poor, the youth remain unemployed, and the continent remains tethered to the approval of foreign capitals. It is a path that promises stability but delivers stagnation. South Africa's present condition is a sobering reminder of where this road leads. The second path is more turbulent. It is the road of radical confrontation, where nations defy old powers without building the internal capacity to sustain themselves. This road carries risk, economic isolation, sanctions, and even internal strife. History has shown that rage without organization can spiral into violence that consumes more than it liberates. Africa cannot afford to replace one form of oppression with another. Courage must not collapse into recklessness. Yet there is a third path, one that demands vision, sacrifice, and long-term resolve. It is the path of sovereignty built on self-reliance, regional solidarity, and genuine investment in people. On this path, leaders do not wait for permission to act. They prioritize agriculture to feed their people rather than importing food at inflated prices. They invest in education that reflects African realities, preparing youth not just for jobs abroad but for building industries at home. They strengthen regional trade so that African nations trade with one another before rushing to Europe or America. They build local manufacturing, energy independence, and technological innovation. This is the path of true African development, measured not in the applause of foreign investors, but in the dignity of African communities. This road will not be easy. It requires leaders who are willing to be unpopular in Paris, Brussels, or Washington if it means being remembered with love in Lagos, Nairobi, or Ouagadougou. It requires the courage to confront entrenched elites within, not just forces from outside. And above all, it requires the people themselves to demand nothing less than honesty, service, and sacrifice from those who claim to lead them. For our elders who remember the chants of liberation in the streets of Soweto and Accra, the lesson is clear. Freedom is never finished. For the youth who carry degrees but no jobs, who carry dreams but no tools, the message is urgent. You are not the future. You are the present. And without you, there is no future at all. Africa's rise will not be written in promises but in choices, and those choices must be made now. And so, as the continent pauses at this fork, the question resounds like a drumbeat across villages and cities alike. Will Africa choose comfort or courage? Africa's story has never been a straight line. It is a story of peaks and valleys, of triumphs born from sacrifice and setbacks born from compromise. South Africa's present condition reminds us that liberation without transformation is fragile, and that even the brightest flames can dim when leaders choose caution over courage. Yet it also reminds us that the struggle is not finished. Across the continent, voices are rising once more. From Ouagadougou to Nairobi, from Lagos to Johannesburg, a generation is awakening to the truth that freedom cannot be outsourced nor dignity delayed. The lesson is clear. Political independence was only the first chapter. The deeper work lies in dismantling the economic systems that keep us bound and in building new structures rooted in justice, solidarity, and sovereignty. This is the essence of anti-colonial Africa, not simply waving new flags, but creating a future where Africa governs itself on its own terms. It is not about rejecting the world, but about refusing to bow before it. It is about reclaiming what was stolen and building what was denied. For our elders, this is the moment to see the fruits of decades of sacrifice. For our youth, this is the time to rise not as followers, but as leaders in their own right. The path of African development will not be paved by foreign conferences, but by the hands of African farmers, workers, teachers, and builders. It will be shaped in classrooms that teach pride, in fields that grow food for our people, and in industries that serve our continent first. This is how Africa will stand tall, not through borrowed models, but through its own courage. So I say to you, if this story moves your heart, do not let it pass in silence. Like, share, and subscribe, not for numbers, but to keep alive a conversation our elders began and our children must finish. Our history was muted too long. Now let us declare our future out loud. The question is no longer whether Africa can rise. The question is whether we will rise together boldly and without apology. And to that, the answer must be one. Yes, Africa can. Yes, Africa will. Suggested comments for viewers: New Africa. Africa rise. Africa can do it. It's time for Africa.